Where are you from? That's a simple enough question, right? So many of us get that all the time on a regular basis. It comes up when we meet someone for the first time by happenstance or introducing ourselves to a new colleague, starting a new job, and we're interacting with our new colleagues for the first time. We're at a networking event and we're mingling with people we've never met before. It's a very simple question, very routine question. Many people don't think much of it. But for people like me, and I bet for many of you listening who can also identify with second generation or 1.5 generation, that question, where are you from, can be a little bit more complex or nuanced than it can seem on the surface. So with the question, where am I from? I mean, that's a lot of people just go to your kind of your birthplace where you grew up. And for me, that's where I was born, Seattle, Washington, where I grew up. The suburbs of Seattle, Washington, east of the city, 15, 20 minutes away in Bellevue and Issaquah, Washington. That will be my response when I talk to many people in the circumstances I outlined. But my answer, and many of you listening will be able to relate to this, but my answer answer to where am I from will very much change depending on who I'm talking to, right? So like if I'm talking to another African or someone who's second generation like me, I'll say I'm from Seattle, but I'm from Ghana. My family is from Ghana. Or I'll say I'm from Seattle, but my family is from Ghana. Or maybe they'll even kind of elicit that from me, right? So maybe I'll tell them I'm from Seattle, and then they'll say, kind of because of their context, right? And knowing their kind of immigrant background to a certain extent, they'll say, yeah, but where are you really from? And then that's when I know, okay, I know what you're talking about. And many of you listening will know what I'm talking about, right? Like that kind of follow-up where you kinda have to explain yourself a little bit more, and that's when I'll say, "Oh, yeah, I was born and raised here, but my family's actually from here. That's where our roots are," and whatnot. And so, kinda long story short, right, my answer to the question, "Where am I from?" is, there's a lot more layers to that than you may think on the surface, and that brings me to the whole idea of being a third culture kid. Being second generation Ghanaian American. I am third culture. And for those of you who have heard that term or who haven't heard that term, being a third culture kid essentially means you spent your formative years or kind of came up in a culture that was different than the culture your parents came up in. So for me, being second generation Ghanaian American, that was my circumstances. Both my parents were born and raised in Ghana. They didn't come to the United States until they were adults going to college. So that brings me to the whole idea of location-based identity. Location plays such a big role in identity, right? Like the town we're from, the city you're from, the county you're from, the state you're from, the side of the country you're from will shape your traditions, right? Your routines, the teams you support, where you lean politically. There's so many aspects to it, right? And so location is a really big part of identity in most cases. But for me, and I think for many of you listening, location-based identity is very fluid for third culture kids. So for me, even though I am literally from Seattle, Washington, I grew up in the suburbs of Seattle, Washington. I don't think I identify as strongly with Seattle, Washington, like the other kids I grew up with that I came up with. And that's because going home, like I didn't relate to the kids I went to school with because going home, my culture was different. The expectations were different. The standards were different. The morals in some instances were different. The food I was eating was definitely different. And so even though I literally spent time in a house in outside of Seattle, Washington, my location felt very fluid to me because depending on the situation and who's asking and where I'm at, I'm Ghanaian American, I'm a black suburban kid, I'm a suburban kid. You know what I'm saying? It really changes. And so I don't look at my identity through a location lens as much as maybe other people do it. And I think a lot of you listening may kind of feel the same. And some of you may be asking, like, why is that even a big deal? Right. Like for a lot of like other Americans, maybe whose generations of their family have been in the US, your answers can change too, right? Like depending where you're at, right? If you're from Seattle and you're in Colorado and you meet someone for the first time, they ask you where you're from and you say Seattle, but then you're in France or Algeria or Turkey, someone asks you where you're from, you're gonna say America. Your answers can change too. So the question that may come is like, why is that such a big deal? Is because when you're for people like me, when your location identity is fluid, you don't really have a home. And I think that's me, right? I don't really feel like so, like, obviously, Seattle is my home, and I love going to see my family, but maybe a lot of the traditions that come with being American or growing up in a suburban America or being Black in America, I don't ever fully relate to the experiences of any of those aspects. So, for that reason, home is kinda different for me. I heard one person say that, like, being a third culture kid, I'm from everywhere but I'm also from nowhere, and that's perfectly explains kind of my experiences, something that I think a lot of people struggle to put words to, but that's kind of what that experience is like, and I bring all that up to kind of break down the complexities of what identity can mean when you're second generation Black American or 1.5 generation Black American, and these are kind of things I'm still going through, but as I've gotten older, I think I'm starting to lean more into the fact that maybe I don't have a home in the traditional sense, right? Like I can fit in so many different cultures or environments, but I can't 100% fit into any one of those cultures. But because of that, that's who I am, right? That's my superpower. That's what home is for me, being able to fit in so many different places. And as I've gotten older and starting to learn more about my Ghanaian heritage in particular and taking that into just my understanding with how my life has played out being from America, being from the Seattle area specifically, it's something I'm learning to embrace, and it's I don't think it's a process that ever ends, but it's something I think I'm being more intentional about embracing, and I don't know who needs to hear this message, but I hope if you're in kind of that situation to embrace that because your uniqueness that makes you authentic, and that's where your power is. I just wanted to get that message across. I'll pretty much do it for this week's episode of Pinnacle Code. I appreciate all you guys who give me feedback, who engage with the episodes. Hit that follow button on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Give me a rating. Give me an honest rating too. You don't have to just give me 5 stars because maybe you know me or you like me, but give me honest feedback. That's really much appreciated so I can put out the best product of this show possible. But yeah, that'll pretty much do it, guys. Until next time, I'll see you guys soon. All right, peace out.